What is up, Tolkien Poppers? I've got another fantastic podcast episode for you today with Elise Trudel Cedeño, who is a reading specialist and a podcaster, writer for the Teaching with Magic online network, I guess you would say. She does all kinds of stuff. She does curriculum writing. She does interviews with awesome scholars of fantasy and teaching and science. And then she does great work on giving reflections about her own professionalism regarding education and her particular expertise. So if you enjoy fantasy, learning new things, just becoming more educationally and academically adept, then this conversation's for you. So sit back, put up your feet, maybe grab a nice pint, some tea, a little pipe there with a little pipe weed from the finest, old Toby from the South Farthing, and enjoy this conversation with Elise. What's up, everybody? This is Nick, and I am joined here by Elise Trudel Cedeño, who is a reading specialist by day, a writer and a podcaster of the Teaching with Magic just network by, probably day too, but night as well, I'm assuming. And she's just an overall awesome person. And she's actually taught me some things as I've entered into education. So anyway, I won't ramble on about how awesome you are, Elise, but welcome to Tolkien Pop.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much. But you can ramble on a little more if you want. It's okay. I'll let you.
Yeah, Elise is awesome.
I'm joking.
She's super cool.
Aw,
No,
thanks,
you
buddy.
don't have to joke. Yeah. Get that, that self-confidence, that positive self-talk or whatever,
Yeah,
the good stuff.
we all need to work on positive self-talk for sure.
Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah.
skill to have.
Right. So just, before we go in there, Elise, kind of how we met is I think that I listened to Teaching with Magic podcast. I think just being around Tolkien circles, you kind of posted your stuff around and people shared it. And so I listened to it because I was like, oh, I'm starting education. This is a person who is obviously involved in education and also a big nerd. And I listened and learned, and I think specifically the science of reading stuff you posted, and it was blew my brain. And so then I think we probably messaged each other or followed each other. I'm trying to remember exactly, but then you reached out directly and were like, hey, I'm doing a Signum class on this. And you hooked me up and I joined it, and I'm still using that and pointing, ELA teachers and trying to get people on the train. So
Yes.
Am I remembering? Am I recalling our
That
interactions?
sounds about right. I'm sure we've got friends of friends, we're both members of the Tolkien Society. I knew, and I wanted to teach my my science of reading course through Signum because I knew that it's something that not a lot of people know about. And especially if you're not an educator or you're not a reading teacher, the science of reading just isn't talked about in our circles because it's mostly an education phenomenon, but it also links really well to some of the things that Tolkien talks about. So that's why I thought, hey, this is going to be a great place for people to learn and for people to learn about the science of reading because, hey, language and how reading is. We've got all these misconceptions about how reading is taught and how reading should be taught. And I figured, I'm sure there are parents who are Signum Space parents who want to know more about the science of reading and, want to, work on teaching their kids how to read. And I also knew that you were going into education. And listen, all the help that new teachers can get, let's do it. Like as much help as we can give our brand new teachers. Everybody needs PD, everybody needs support, everybody needs mentors. And that's kind of what I'm hoping that Teaching with Magic is doing and will continue to do. So, heck yeah.
I know I've experienced it, so I hope that others do too. And people who listen to this, if you're in that realm or if you're just a Tolkien fan, or just a fantasy or sci-fi fan, because you don't just keep it in, in the realm of your professional expertise or the Tolkien world. You kind of branch out and bring in a bunch of cool people to talk about stuff.
I certainly try for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun. Yeah, so I'll have links and stuff. Obviously, teaching with magic. We'll add some stuff. Some targeted ads there throughout. But I guess too. So you've kind of given us a little more talking about who you are, what you do, that sort of thing. But because I'm kind of a Tolkien person and trying to emphasize this, and I love too just the giving nature of teachers, and I think also too the Tolkien community is very much the same, where people are like, we don't care where you come from, how new you are, we just want you to be stoked on Tolkien. Teachers are like, we just want you to survive. Here's the best way to do this. And so I feel like it's a great place to converge.
For sure.
Something awesome there. Yeah. So because we're talking about Tolkien, would you mind giving us a brief account of when you encountered Tolkien, possibly other fandoms that you found interest in that really got you into them, and then maybe reflect a little bit on how Tolkien and more possibly impacted you?
For sure. So when I was little, I always loved fantasy and folklore. Like my parents loved to tell stories about how I was watching Beauty and the Beast from like the age of 2. So I was a Disney girly when I was growing up. I would check out almost the entire folklore section at my library just so that I could see and read like different versions of the same story. Like I probably checked out probably like 10 versions of Beauty and the Beast, 12 versions of Cinderella. Like I just wanted to see how all of these fantasies and stories converged, and there's similarities, their differences. I was just always into fairy tales and folklore. I loved C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That was one of my first like core memories of fantasy when I was younger. There was a 50th anniversary edition. I'll never forget this. It had a green cover, and it had these beautiful plate illustrations from Pauline Baynes. And then one day it just disappeared from the library. And for almost like 15, 20 years, my mother and I were searching for this book because I loved it so much. I checked it out as often as I could from the library, and my mom was trying to buy me my own copy. And then one day I just tweeted out into the universe. I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, and I'm like, I'm looking for this book. I tweeted it out into the universe, and somebody said, "Are you talking about this version?" And I found it. I found the book. It was so great. So that was my first kind of foray into fantasy. And then The Lord of the Rings came out in film when I was about 11 years old. My dad thought I was a little too young to be going to a PG-13 movie, so he rented the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings instead. So that was my very first exposure to Tolkien, was the Balrog with the fuzzy Ugg boots. And I'm never going to forget that. It was just such a great intro to The Lord of the Rings. But I loved it. I absolutely loved I loved the Bakshi film. I saw the films when they came out. My dad also got me in heavy into Star Wars when I was growing up. My dad has always been my fellow Star Wars fan. Every time one of the movies came out, we would make a family trip, go to the movies together. Whether it was the prequels, whether it was the newer ones that were coming out, that was just a big family affair. So that's how I really got into fantasy as a kid, just through my parents' introduction, through my own searching. And I guess like I've always been hungry for more stories. Like I was always the kid in the corner reading a book. I just, as I grew older, I just wanted to keep sharing these stories with other adults, with kids, because it's like, wait, you're like me. You like this story too? Hey, I think you'll really like this story. Like, especially when I got into Signum and I met other people who actually read like the Belgariad or some of the other stories that I'd read that nobody else knew about. And I'm like, you actually know what I'm talking about. We speak the same language. So it's like when you're a kid, especially when you're a teenager, like it's hard to find your people, and you want to feel like you belong. So fantasy, I think, is it's such a great community. Fantasy readers and the Tolkien community, they're all just such good people, and it's a great place to belong. So that's kind of my long-winded explanation of how I got into Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings growing up.
No, that is amazing. I love that. You know, dads who introduce their kids to Star Wars, that's a good dad right there. My
Oh yeah.
dad did the same. Had like a 3 box set from the 90s with like the posters. You know, we wore those VHS tapes out
Oh, for sure.
constantly, you know.
I'm almost positive there's a picture out there somewhere. I'm sure my dad will deny this up and down, but I think there's a picture out there somewhere of my dad dressed as R2D2 on the local football field for a halftime
Yes.
game or something, or a halftime performance. But I'm sure he's going to deny this. So you didn't hear it from me.
Well, if it happens, please send it, and you find it, please send that to me because that sounds awesome. That's pretty epic. Um, you know, just one of the things that I'll kind of pick up, reflect on what you said was just the belonging part is such
Mm,
a key aspect there because I think that like, so I have very similar kind of things. Narnia was first, Star Wars dad, and then of course
mm-hmm.
we're around the same age, so I also saw Lord of the Rings as they started coming out. I didn't get to see it until the Return of the King because my parents also thought I was too young. Um, but I was not like the reader because the sense of belonging were like the middle school, high school dude bros. You know, you had to like
Mm-hmm.
go around and run around, and you only liked Star Wars and Lord of the Rings because there was epic battle scenes.
Yes.
And as I got older, you know, wasn't really connected to this, but as I started getting older, recognizing some things, settling down, I remember being like, The Fellowship is my favorite book when I finally got around to it. Why is that? And I was like, dang, I'm kind of more of a homebody than I thought I was, and I really enjoy this. And then I found out there was a thing called the Silmarillion. There's a thing called the Tolkien Society, right? And then it's
What?
just, you get on the internet and then you meet cool people and just, like you said, if you're like, I don't know what edition of this Narnia or Tolkien book or this edition of Dune, people are going to find it and they'll
They're going
give
to
it to
find it.
you.
Somebody out there. The people are going to find it. Somebody out there somewhere knows it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
They're all just everybody's just so everybody that I think I'm sure. I mean, there are some, of course, there's some bad people out there, unfortunately, especially with like you get the bad faith people who just won't give certain TV shows a chance. But there are good people out there, and they will find you, and they will help you, and they will be there for you. Like it is a fellowship at times, and the moots that we've been to have definitely proven that. Even just the fact that you and I connected over the internet and you said, hey, I'm going into teaching, how the heck do I do this? And I said, I got you, bro, let's do it. Like we figure it out, we figure out a way to help each other. And I think that's something that I always want to do as a teacher and as a friend, is to help people, help my students figure out what's going on in their reading, or maybe there's a student out there who's really upset because some kids have been teasing them, and I can put a book in their hands and say, this is where you're going to find your friends.
Mm.
Thankfully, a lot of my students have already they've already found that book that helps them out, or they found the friends. So I'm just kind of guiding them along the way, hopefully.
I love that. I love that. And, you know, since you've brought up kind of translating some of that community aspect into your, you know, education and your teaching,
Mm-hmm.
I guess tell us, like, what drew you to education, right? How did you get interested? And, like, how has it driven your life now? And then tell me how, like, pop culture, how you've integrated that into your expertise.
So, fun fact, I actually did not go into college, or my I didn't go into my undergrad thinking I was going to be a teacher.
Hey, same.
I actually went into so I went to Wagner College, which is a tiny private college in Staten Island, New York City, and it's known, or it was it's most famously known for its musical theater program. And I thought to myself, okay, I want to be an actor. I want to be on Broadway. Tiny little college. I've never been in a big city before. This tiny little college in sort of a suburban-ish area of New York City. This will be a great transition. I got to the school. I got accepted into the school. I got into Wagner College, but I did not get accepted into the musical theater program. I had delusions of grandeur about my actual skills as a musical theater person. Um, I am not particularly skilled in dancing and I am not particularly skilled in singing, but when you grow up in a tiny town and there are very few actors who actually have talent in the area, you start to get a few delusions of grandeur about your actual abilities. So reality reared its ugly head for a minute. But as part of the sort of gen ed courses, one of them was a like sort of the freshman intro classes. One of them ended up being a philosophy of education class, and it was paired with an art history class. So I would go to class during the week. I would go to an art history class, and I would go to this philosophy of ed class. And then we paired with a local elementary school and worked on reading skills with them. There were some kindergartners who were working on reading, and at one point we did a exhibition tour with the Brooklyn Museum. So it kind of paired with that art history bit. So we had a little bit of experiential learning to go along with the classes we were taking. And it's how I got into education. I thought, okay, I'm a reader. I love English. So maybe I'll be an English teacher. So I majored in English and minored in education. And then by the time I got to graduate school time, I thought, what the heck? I'll apply to Teachers College of Columbia University. I didn't think I would get in because it's Columbia University. It was pretty hard to get into at the time, but lo and behold, I got in. So that's how I got my graduate degree in education. And then as I started going into the real world and actually teaching, I missed the analysis of teaching English and reading English books and writing papers for English. But I didn't want to go into higher education. I didn't want to go into college or university teaching. I wanted to keep teaching middle school and high school. So teaching with magic kind of became, and along with Signum University, that kind of became my sort of gateway into merging my two loves together, because studying teaching and studying education is more of a social science. It's not a lot of times if you are going to do research in it, you have to work with kids, and you have to gather data on the kids or on what the kids are doing, or you have to take some sort of ethnographic kind of data as well. Whereas when you're reading a book or you're looking at a story, you're analyzing characters, or you're using some kind of theory to analyze the story. So it kind of became a bit of a monster from there. As I got into Signum and I got back into the literature part of it, I thought, okay, I can do some kind of character analysis here by looking at mentor teachers in literature. And of course, Tolkien's a great place to start, because he and Lewis were kind of the fathers of modern fantasy. And with everybody who's in literature and knows about Joseph Campbell's hero cycle. That's what it's called, Joseph Campbell's hero cycle. And there's usually, if not always, a mentor figure of some kind. I mean, Star Wars is an homage to Joseph Campbell's hero cycle. So you got Obi-Wan Kenobi with his hood up going, hello there. You've got Dumbledore, you've got Gandalf, you've always got that wise old being who teaches the hero and then says, all right, on your way, you've learned all you can learn. Now you got to go out in the real world and be your own person. So I've had fun with teaching of magic in looking at these mentor figures and looking at other teachers in literature and how they teach and how they what we can learn as teachers from this literature. Granted, they're characters, so there's some artistic license in there. I mean, I can't imagine a lot of people want to sit in at a Hogwarts staff meeting or a professional development led by the teachers of Roke, but maybe they do. So sometimes I imagine, all right, how would a staff meeting go with the Wizards of Roke? And then you just get to, you can read a couple of the Tales of Earthsea and go, oh, so that's what happened in the staff meeting. Okay, good. Good to know.
It'd probably be
So,
just as organized.
just, yeah. He's, for those of you who are not educators in this world, Nick is kidding. Nick is kidding. They are not that organized. And they're not always that fun. But so that's kind of what I've been doing with teaching of magic. But also looking at how teachers can use fantasy in their own content. So I've talked to Christine Larson and how she uses Tolkien to teach astronomy and to teach science. She's talked about creation myths. She's talked about how she's used Tolkien to talk about creation myths and how that's translated into modern day astronomy and what cultures will take from these stars and what they've learned about these stars. And so I've talked to people who've talked about history, who've talked about science and math. It's just talking. If you want to learn about how things work, just talk to other teachers, because other teachers will always help you out and they'll always tell you what's up. And so it's my hope that fantasy is the gateway to the real world, because we often use the real world as part of our world building in fantasy. So anything that is that we want to know about a fantasy world, you can probably learn from the real world too, especially if you're as detailed and meticulous as Tolkien was. I mean, just to look at the entirety of the nature of Middle Earth, you have all kinds of astronomy in there.
Man, it's real.
It's so real. It's very real. I would also add that, like, on the flip side, as a dyslexia educator, so I'm a reading specialist by trade, and I teach students in my current job. I teach students who have language-based learning disabilities. So something in their brain is making it really difficult for them to look at a printed text, decode it, and fully understand what they have read. So in some cases, the page could just look like absolute gibberish. Other times, they recognize the letters on the page and the words on the page, but it's taking their brain longer to process the printed word. Because, fun fact, and I know you've learned this because I taught you this.
Yeah, you did.
The brain is not naturally wired for reading. The brain is naturally wired for speaking and for listening. Reading is an entirely human invention. So but unfortunately, a lot of kids think that because they either can't read or they've been taught to read incorrectly, it means that they're stupid. And it's really hard to be 9, 10, 11 years old and called on by the teacher to say, hey, it's time to read this passage. And they look at the passage and they have no clue what's in front of them. But then as I got into Signum University and Tolkien, reading Tolkien and looking not only at his fictional language building, but also looking at how he, as a linguist, as a philologist, talks about language and how English is structured and how meticulously it's been structured over time. I can make those connections, and I can tell those connections to my students. I have to help my students learn the rules of English, and sometimes the rules of English are really difficult.
Right.
And so by understanding how English works and looking at Tolkien, I can tell them when they ask me, oh, Miss Cedeño, why do I have to learn these rules? Why do I have to learn this spelling? This is so stupid. What is going on here? I can tell them, guess what, kids? It's because of the Vikings, it's because of the Romans, and it's because of William the Conqueror and the Normans. That's why English is the way it is. And then they could go, curse you, William the Conqueror. So centuries later, we're still cursing William the Conqueror. The poor guy's dead and buried, long gone. He's dust, and he's still getting cursed out, the poor guy. So if you look at language the way that Tolkien describes it, he literally built it from the bottom up, from literally the sounds. The very basics of language is the sounds within the word. Sounds create words, create sentences, create paragraphs, create stories, create cultures. So from those very teeny tiny beginnings, you can get so much. If you treat language like building blocks, if you treat it like a pattern rather than stare at the page and hope something comes to you, then um, you'll begin to understand what's in front of you. And this is a good philosophy overall for teaching, is you have to build from the ground up. You can't expect kids to fly if they haven't built the airplane yet.
Mm.
And so you have to start from the basics, and you have to start from, just assume that either they're not sure how to do it or they don't know how to do something. It can be harder when you're in high school, but if you teach them, this is how a sentence is structured. Once you build this sentence, then you can build this paragraph, then you can build a whole story. Going from there, building those blocks so that every student can eventually access those texts. I've rambled on. It's my turn to ramble.
No, it's so good. It's so good. And I can even say in my own teaching, when I learned about the reading or the science of reading, is like, even when I was able to break that down and communicate it to my students, the ones who was like, okay, here's some new words, here's what they mean, here's what part of speech they are, etc. And then kids are like, oh, this is so dumb. Why do we learn this? And when I was like, okay, you know how to read, right? If you didn't know the alphabet or how they sounded, you couldn't do it. So you can't write a sentence or a good one without knowing the definitions and building your vocabulary. And for the kids who actually, care, and even for the ones who don't, who eventually, get there, something clicks for them when they recognize it. And I think, just like you said, just understanding that, exactly as you said, that we don't just wake up, or we come out of the womb ready to speak, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're definitely not ready to read. It's comforting. And I can even say too, like I went to school for religion, specifically
Mm-hmm.
within a Christian context. And I was a terrible reader, found out I had ADHD later on in life. Couldn't do it, hate it, especially Bible studies and Bible classes, because it was so much reading. And I had a teacher who found out that I liked Lord of the Rings. And of course, the Silmarillion is filled with all kinds of ridiculous
It's
details.
it's biblical
Right. And he
in
was
the
like,
metaphorical and almost literal sense of the word. Yes.
right. And he was like, dude, just treat these biblical texts like you would as you're nerding out about the Silmarillion. And even tying it to like history, as you said, like Vikings, William the Conqueror, there's something that kids can attach to, too. Not only are they learning, but then they're like, curse you, William the Conqueror. And you're talking about Vikings and stuff, which is so much fun. And so, I think that there's, you've kind of pointed at how bringing these things together in your own experience, but then but then kind of giving them through your teaching process has been extremely helpful, and can be. And I think that there's a sort of divide, within pedagogy, within teaching, that either emphasizes extreme rigor, right? We're only talking about science of reading. We're only talking about vocabulary and grammar, right? And then there's the other ones that's like loosey-goosey, that's like, oh, let's let the kids lead the class. We don't need to do anything. We just need to show up and be amazing. And, both seem to be not great
Mm-hmm.
by themselves, but where do you see a balanced strategy between the two, and how does your work with teaching with magic address your particular pedagogical outlook?
For sure. So I do think that these pendulum swings, like that's a common like way to put it, that a lot of people within especially within the science of reading community think about it. They're like, whoa, we can either do a drill and kill method and just quiz the kids and drill them in sounds and language and flashcards until they're bored to death. Or we can set them up with little fluffy pillows in the classroom and have lovely little like cottage core decorations all around. And if you just put a book in their hands, they'll magically learn how to read. I put on a little airy fairy voice. I sound like I'm kidding, but I swear to God, Nick, that is exactly how teachers were taught to teach kids how to read in the Lucy Consecutive Study Program.
You're already there. You're already witnessing it or hearing it, you know. But if you want to hear Elise just like get ready to burn down something, have her just bring up I can't remember what the movement's called, but what's the movement again called?
There's the whole language movement
Yeah,
and balanced literacy.
yeah. Bring those up, and Elise, I can just see it. The anger.
You can literally see my face turning red right now. So it's because like there's been these various schools of thought, and the whole language movement and balanced literacy, it had, and I'm being a little bit facetious for here, but I'm really not. Um, if and the whole language movement is not based in science at all. It's actually based on basically a couple of people decided they hated the drill and kill method, and so they decided they were going to do something about it and just try and make school as not even fun, but as I don't even know the right word for it. Just, I don't want to say pleasurable because that's a weird thing to say in a podcast. Just not as torturous as possible.
Approachable, maybe?
Approachable, sure. Let's say approachable. You can edit that out. You can edit all that out.
No, we're keeping pleasurable in.
Oh boy. Oh boy. It's that kind of podcast, apparently. Oh boy. So you have one side of the coin, which is, you know, drill the kids until they can't do it, until they're just so bored of grammar and of looking at flashcards that it kills the joy of reading. But then on the other side, you have the fluffy pillows, and if you put the right book in the kids' hands, they'll figure it out and they'll enjoy reading. But what the last 20 years of teaching has taught us, especially right before COVID, was that kids looked like they knew how to read. So they did the performative active reading. They sat on the fluffy pillows, they had a book in front of them, and they learned how to guess what was on the page based on the little alphabetic knowledge that they did have and the clues that the pictures in picture books were giving them. And then studies show that by the time they got to fourth grade and you started taking those pictures away, their reading and their comprehension became less and less accurate. So a lot of kids over time, especially kids with ADHD, kids with reading disabilities, kids whose processing was just a little bit different than other kids, would learn how to skate by. They learned how to fake it. And so a lot of kids would go through we'd go through the motions of passing kids to keep our retention rates up. And we stopped believing in grade retentions as a country. We stopped believing like, all right, this kid isn't getting it, so we're going to keep him behind for a couple of years. And some places still do that, but you can only legally do that for a certain number of years. Like you can't have an 18-year-old in a sixth grade class. You legally can't.
Right.
So the balance, and I hesitate to use the word balance because, you know, balanced literacy isn't actually balanced. But what you do need to do is find a middle ground, figure out what are the skills that do need to be explicitly taught and practiced, but also finding ways to guide kids to making their own connections and hopefully make reading fun, because at times reading isn't fun. And we want to do that there's a concept, this guy Vygotsky, no, it's either Vygotsky or Chomsky. I'll look it up later. It's called the zone of proximal development. And you want to work within a student's zone of proximal development. So what this zone means is you have the content and the skills, concepts, whatever it might be, that are too difficult for a child, that are just above their grade level, probably not developmentally appropriate. That's too much. But then you've also got the stuff that's too easy. I know my ABCs. I can sing the ABC song. It's totally fine. I can do that. You don't need to put a baby book in front of me, because I'm a reader. I've learned how to read. I've learned the skills. But if you put an engineering textbook in front of me, I can probably decode the words on the page because I know how to decode, but I don't have the background knowledge as an engineer to understand what's in front of me. So that's outside of my zone of proximal development. So you have to figure out what do our kids know? What should they know perhaps by the time they get to this age or this grade? What are the skills they might still need practice on? So for example, when I was a kid, times tables were not my thing. I really struggled with math and with times tables. I didn't quite understand that with multiplication, had you would get more by adding groups of things. So in addition to needing to be drilled in my times tables, I also needed to see the multiplication problem visually. Like I needed to see an example. Or if we were working on fractions, I needed a visual representation like a pie. So while I still needed to know my numbers and I needed to know quickly that 1 + 1 = 2, and I needed to do that within a fraction of a second and have that drill, I still needed to know how to do multiplication conceptually. So I know that with my students in particular, with dyslexic students, their brains don't process text automatically. So I have to show them the letter. I have to tell them and help them practice the sound that the letter makes and how those sounds build into a syllable and then into a word. So right now I use Orton Gillingham. It's a specific methodology on teaching reading. And a lot of science of reading programs are adopting this methodology because we know it works for kids with dyslexia. So if it works for kids with dyslexia, it's probably going to work for everybody else too. Sorry, excuse me. So right now what I do is I have the word displayed on the screen. I've told them, okay, this is a word. This word follows this specific syllable pattern. And then I show them other words that also fall within this syllable pattern. And I could have them look at the board and go, this is the word. This is the word. I am reading the word. I am reading the word. You're already falling asleep. So what I do instead is I take flashcards or I take game cards and I write them on the card. I write the words on the cards and I play war with them. Okay, so not only do they have to read the word, there's also a little number next to the word. So, we put down the card, I read the word, my student reads the word. Whoever reads the word correctly and has the higher point value gets the card. But if I have a card with a higher point value and I misread that word, my partner could potentially take the card. So adding a certain level of competition helps with building that automaticity. My student is learning to read that word and to read that word quickly because their brain can't automatically do that. They can't look at a word and read it within less than a second. My brain can do that as a non-dyslexic brain. My student needs to be trained to do that. So they need that drill, but we don't have to kill the fun of it either. You can play games. You can build vocabulary using morphology matrices, or you can look at the Greek. If you're doing a science unit and you need to build some vocabulary in there too, look at the root words of what particular concept. Words like hydrate, hydration, those are all coming from the same root of hydra or hydro, which in turn has to do with water. That's the Greek word for water. So anything that has to do with water will probably have that root in it. A couple of weeks ago, I had students build magical creatures using Greek and Latin root words. So they had to pick Greek and Latin root words, because if you look at Greek mythology and you look at Latin mythology, those animals, centaurs, minotaurs, unicorns, dragons, they all have characteristics, and the physical characteristics were usually built into that name. So minotaur, for example, literally means Minos's bull. That tor means bull. So the monster, the minotaur, literally means Minos's bulls. This was the monster that belonged to King Minos of Crete. So we read the story together. We look at the root words of those creatures. And then I give them some crafts. I give them a list of those roots. And I say, all right, build your own creature. And before you know it, we've got a magical menagerie of all of these creatures. I had one kid make a fish with one eye. It was called the Unioculus sparkolificus. they made it up. They had fun with it. And then this kid wrote me a whole paragraph on not only like what the animal creature looks like, but what's its habitat, where does it live, what are its predators, what's its prey, what are its adaptations, and how does it protect itself. They built a whole science paragraph out of those tiny little root words. So rigor does not have to mean killing the joy of learning. It just means working within the student's skills and then building the new skills over time so that they have learned those concepts. So whether that's with reading, whether that's with science, there are some things you might have to drill, but you can make the drill fun and you can link it to a real world concept or a project.
Man, that's so cool. As a green teacher, I hear that and I'm like, all the ideas of like, how do I make Franz Kafka fun? How do I make, I teach a film class. How do I make German expressionism fun?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't know much about German expressionism, but have fun with that one.
Yeah. I teach, I enjoy it as a personal thing, which it's in our curriculum. I really like cynical and sad literature to the chagrin of my students. But, I try to make it fun through other things, but I'm taking these ideas and I love everything you said about, especially when you were like, the rigor doesn't have to go away, but the fun doesn't have to either, because I think that it really isn't balanced. Like the rigor has to be there. If we are in a sense like societally obligated to develop in a certain way to succeed, the rigor has to be there. But
exactly.
The fun aspects, especially making the different animals with the Greek and Latin root words, is just amazing. I love that.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, and I can just see the stuff, how that influences, and if there's any teachers out there, I really hope that helps, because I know it helps me. So I guess too, now that we've talked about the pedagogical part there and the scientific aspects of teaching, like bring us back to like the fun, the pop culture part. So how can pop culture deepen the aims of education and foster the intellectual growth of students of all ages? And also, like you said, the OG method, I heard about that in a PD recently, for particularly with English language learners. And so these things are translatable not just for kids with disabilities or not non-disabilities, or even just non-English speakers. So anyway, give us your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So pop culture is almost a universal language. I mean, there are some things in pop culture that many kids may not know, or maybe like not everybody can recite all of the Sons of Feanor off the top of their head. I mean, Lord knows I still can't. Unless you're Michael Drought, I don't think anyone knows all. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there, but it gives us a universal language and universal background knowledge that helps us to build a common language together. If a really good movie comes out, like there's a popular movie that comes out, that's a hook that you can use with your students if you can make that connection. I have taught The Lord of the Rings and I've taught The Hobbit to 10-year-olds, to younger students as a club. And what I love about Tolkien, what I love about Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, is that this one story can unearth so much real world content that I could potentially put it into any form of a lesson. So one thing I love to do when I first start out The Hobbit is just give them Tolkien's foreword to The Hobbit, because he tells you how to translate the runes right away. He tells you that it's almost exactly like the English alphabet, except for a couple of characters here and there. And then I give them I give them a code sheet, and I tell them to translate those runes into the letters of the alphabet just using that foreword. So they use that code to translate the messages on Thorin's map. They translate the runes on Thorin's map. So cool. Right away, I've given them an almost comparative analysis of Anglo-Saxon Futhark runes. And these are transliterated. Like Tolkien admitted that these are not exactly runes. They're not even exactly the Cirthangerthas. If you were to look in they're pretty close to the Cirthangerthas, but it's not one on one. It's not absolutely perfect. He was still developing the language at the time. But they've looked at these letters, they've looked at the shape of the letters, and they've said, oh, those look like something that would probably be carved in stone. Hello, kitty cat. Kitty. Sorry, I always get distracted by kitty cats. They're just like fluffy. Okay, so I've shown them, oh, this was a culture that carved things into stone or into rock, or they scratched it into something. So just by the shape of the letters, I've already learned something about this culture. This probably wasn't written with ink. It was probably written on stone. So they've deduced that, and they've drawn that inference with what they've seen on the page. They've looked at the poetry already. They're already doing a brief poetic analysis of the runes and of the message that it says in the runes. So that's the background knowledge that they'll need as they continue reading the story. As they read The Hobbit, they're going to learn about dragons. They're going to learn about how people have faced dragons. Hey, you've got your knights in shining armor, but you've also got people who tricked dragons and outwitted them and used their brains instead of their bronze. We're building, they're building that analysis already. And so with that, they might take, because these stories are so popular and because they're so because people have borrowed from Tolkien over time, people have borrowed from Lewis, people are borrow, and even George Lucas borrowed from Joseph Campbell and from European and Asian stories that have become tropes and have become visual ahas, or I understood that reference moments throughout our culture. And so if I have a student who's never read English before, but he's seen if he's seen Star Wars or the Lord of the Rings in Spanish, we have that connection together, and I can draw on that inference. I know, because Latin is the start of Romance languages. I know there are connections between Spanish, Italian, and French. So if there is a word in English that is a cognate of a Spanish word, I can use my English knowledge to help my Spanish, and my Spanish to help my English, and so on and so forth. There's tons of research out there about how bilingualism, multilingualism makes the brain stronger and helps students develop their critical thinking skills, because they have to use their linguistic brain. All of those languages are helping each other draw those conclusions. So I had a student a couple of weeks ago. We were looking at all of the sounds of the long vowel E. So any spellings, there are a bunch of spellings and a bunch of combinations, letter spellings that make the E sound. And she knew it in her head. She knew that there was a combination, but she couldn't remember what it was. But she could remember that it started the English translation for the word águila. Águila means eagle in Spanish. She was thinking of EA, which makes the E sound like an eagle. So she couldn't tell me in English because she couldn't remember exactly what it was, but she could tell me in Spanish. And because I speak a little bit of Spanish, I was able to translate that for her and go, oh, you're talking about an eagle. EA says E. That's it. So we have that common background knowledge together, and we're able to build that together. What I know may not be the same thing that another student might know or another student might know. But if we bring all of that collective knowledge together, we can figure out the puzzle as we continue going. And I think pop culture really helps students build that collective language, and it helps teachers build that collective language. We talk about Gandalf and how I analyze Gandalf as a teacher all the time. And I have to laugh every time Pippin, especially that scene in the books, when Pippin and Gandalf are sitting on Shadowfax, they're on their way to Minas Tirith. They are literally booking it because Pippin, like an idiot, decided it was time to look into the Palantir. And let's be honest, teachers, we've all had that student where you're like, oh my God, can you please stop talking for 5 minutes and stop asking me questions for 5 minutes because I have to get through this lesson. But in the back of your mind, you're like, oh my God, I've been trying to get this kid to talk for 3 months now. Please keep asking questions. And you're like, you're balancing. And Gandalf is my homeboy. I'm just gonna say it right now. Gandalf is like chef's kiss.
He's a real
I
one.
love him.
He's a real one.
He's a real one. He like sometimes he's like, oh my God, you guys, like, I know as one of the Eastar, I'm not supposed to defeat Sauron, but sometimes, I really want to sock the guy right now. I really want to sock the guy in the face, but no, I'm supposed to compel men and elves to work together and make sure the peoples of Middle Earth figure out how to kick Sauron out of Middle Earth. It's their job. It's not my job. It's my job to teach them how to do it. But it's actually he has those push and pull moments where he's like, you guys have to do this. I really want to do it, but you guys have to do this. And because he's not Sauron, because he's Gandalf, he's figured out how to step back and say, nope, I got to let the students try it. I have to let them fail. I have to let them figure it out. And I'm going to help them if they fall and want to get back up again. You can always extend a hand to Grima Wormtongue. He may swat it away, but always extend a hand to the Grima Wormtongues and say, I will help you if you need it. But dude, you really got to listen to me. Okay. Otherwise we're going to have a problem. So that's the language that you and I are able to talk about because we're like, yeah, Gandalf, we know. And also we're teachers. So we know we have those students that we're like, yes, please keep asking questions, but also can you please stop talking for 5 minutes so that I can catch my breath? I mean, come on. So that's the universal language that we have thanks to pop culture and thanks to our community.
So good. And if you reach out to that kid who's a worm tongue, they may even take out that administrator that you don't like, but just kidding.
You didn't hear it from me. You didn't hear it from
if any of my admins end up listening to this, just kidding. You're all amazing.
JK. Yes.
But like you said, as even you and I are just talking, we speak that language and are able to build off of that. Gandalf, man, the best.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to take away, from your thunder here as we wrap up, because I think what you said about Gandalf and bringing it in was just spectacular. And I feel like people who listen to this just need to ruminate on that reflection that you gave. But first, I just want to say thanks for doing this. This is more people need to listen to Teaching with Magic. You have been very helpful and a mentor and somebody I look up to in my own education journey.
Thank you,
and
buddy.
Also a fellow Tolkien nerd, which is really fun to just hang out with you too.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we go, oh, cool. Thanks. But I guess before, we end our little session here, is there any reflections that, you didn't get to that you want to share, or there was something that you were like, Nick didn't really ask about this, and I want to make sure people hear this about me or about Tolkien or about, teaching in general?
Oh, that's a great one. I guess I would say that, no matter how difficult it gets, and it can get difficult, teaching is not an easy profession. More people would do it if it were easy. And there are a lot of people out there who have misconceptions about what teaching actually is. And of course, you have a lot of setbacks, and you have a lot of bureaucratic nonsense that will sometimes get in the way of doing the work that you love or helping the kid that needs that extra help. But there's a lot of the bureaucratic red tape in between. And when those moments happen, you have to just remember that it is a job. teaching is a job. It's not something that you have to sacrifice your health over. It's not something that you have to sacrifice your sanity over, even though the world will tell you that teachers are superheroes and they can do it all. Spoiler alert, we cannot. We
Nope.
physically cannot do it all. So have the strength to ask for help, and sometimes just have the strength to say, nope, that's not something I can do right now. I need to go home and I need to sleep so that I can be ready for the job tomorrow. And remember to, even if the bureaucrats or whoever is telling you that you have to teach something a certain way is against either what you love or against what is good practice. Sometimes you do have to color within the lines, but also remember that it's okay to color outside the lines too, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You're making sure that, yes, you want the students to pass your state tests because that's how you get your funding, but you also have to teach them how to be human beings too. And sometimes it's okay to teach them how to take a break as well as pass the test or read the book or watch the movie that the administrators are saying, that's a waste of time. That's not that's not rigorous enough. Like, okay, I challenge all of those teachers to read the Silmarillion and tell me it's not rigorous enough. Come on, people.
Right.
Seriously, though. So find your pockets of joy. And for me, that pocket of joy is, and I love the kids that I work with. I love my job. Sometimes, though, I do just need to sit down and turn my brain off and read The Lord of the Rings or watch The Lord of the Rings on my TV screen, because I'm just like, my brain is baked. I'm done. So find that balance. And if you can, give yourself grace, especially if you're in the beginning of your career and, every day is like, holy cow, I'm just trying to get through the day, then get through the day. It's okay. But my hope is that teaching with magic is not only is it the fun place where we can talk about Star Wars, we can talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we can talk about, sometimes you want to look at Anakin Skywalker and say, you numpty. What are you doing, you numpty? That is not what I taught you back in Padawan school. That's not what no, dude. So hopefully it's the place to have those philosophical conversations when the reality of teaching can sometimes bog you down. And hopefully it's a place where I can also give advice, or I can connect with another teacher who can give you the advice or give you, because unfortunately I don't know everything. So I would rather learn from another teacher than make something up. So if teaching with magic is the place where we can do that, that's my sincere hope. I do have a website. I do have a podcast, and I also have a Patreon. And on that Patreon is a companion activity guide for The Hobbit. So if you get a chance to teach The Hobbit, if you get a chance to either do it for a summer camp or for whether it's for your class or for a club, I developed this activity pack to go along with it, which includes that activity that I talked about, which is decoding the messages of Thorin's map. You can also write your own riddles in the dark. You're teaching kids poetry, looking at these riddles, and teaching them about figurative language and looking at these riddles and developing their own from there. It has discussion questions, journal questions, things that, unfortunately, it's not a unit plan so much as it's a collection of activities, so that if there's a curriculum that you do need to follow, or you have a set thing that you need to do with The Hobbit, you can use my materials as flexibly as you need to. And you can decide which ones you want to keep, which ones you want to toss, which ones will work for your group. So you have the scaffolding to go along with it. And I hope I am working on developing more curriculum in the future. I have a partner that I'm working with to develop high school content lessons on fantasy. We're opening up a shop on Teachers Pay Teachers called Fantasy EDU. That's going to be open soon. So that one will not be on my Patreon, but it will be on Teachers Pay Teachers. So if you're a high school or a middle school teacher, you'll soon have curriculum to be able to work on in your own classroom. So that is currently in the works. I also have a Substack where I blog. So if you want to look at some of my teacher profiles, but yeah, you can find all of those in my link tree, which I'm sure Nick will post in the show notes. When it's all, so it's all going to be in that link tree. It's all that one within that one URL. So all you have to do is just click on that one and it'll all be there for you.
Yeah, and as somebody who has the Hobbit curriculum that you have, especially because I don't think I remembered the Kirth, or I guess I don't know. It's technically not the Kirth, I guess.
Proto Kirth, proto Futhark. Like it's a transliterated. Tolkien basically took the English alphabet and fancied it up to make it look like Anglo-Saxon runes, but it's a transliteration, not even a translation, but a transliteration of the Hobbit and of the. So it's pre Angerthas, like I'm making it look fancy type font. that's Tolkien's version of I'm gonna make it look fancy.
And then he gets real fancy later.
Yes. Then he develops rules.
Yeah. Which I feel like we've come full circle. We've got language here, we've got Tolkien, and then we've got awesome stuff here. So you should, if you're a teacher and you want to teach The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and be a Tolkien evangelist, I would encourage you to get it. It's great stuff. And then, of course, just follow Elise on all the other platforms that I'll have in the show notes, because she's just a cool person and talks about awesome fantasy stuff. So thanks for doing this, Elise. I appreciate it, and I hope to hang out soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Nick. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.